Hello everyone friends, you are watching Ruslan Belov's channel. Today we will take a detailed look at the situation in Ukraine as of December 30th, 2025. Over the past 24 hours, a truly large number of significant and high-profile events have taken place, so we will move straight to the analysis. And of course, the main topic of the day has been a large-scale drone strike on the territory of the Novgorod region. However, we will begin our review with the line of contact, namely the Zaporizhzhia direction, where units of the Russian army continue active offensive operations on both the western Zaporizhzhia and eastern Zaporizhzhia sectors. According to a number of pro-Russian sources, over the past day Russian forces have managed to significantly improve their tactical positions in two areas at once, near the settlement of Primorska and in the Lukyanovsky area. Based on the publications that have appeared, a map adjustment was made. More precisely, an additional area marked as a grey zone was added. I would also like to remind you that just the day before, the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, as well as the commander of the Dnipro troop grouping, reported to the President of the Russian Federation on serious successes and advances specifically in the Lukyanovsky area. Thus, relying on yesterday's official reports and today's updates from various military analysts and cartographers, we are filling in the overall picture between dates. Moreover, even pro-Ukrainian mapping resources are recording further advances by Russian units, shading the grey zone all the way to the southwestern outskirts of the settlement of Rychna, which already falls within the Huliaipole area, as well as toward Veselyanka. This indicates that the offensive is being conducted in a northern direction. At the same time, Valery Gerasimov and the commander of the Dnipro grouping clarified that at present the distance from the forward positions of the Russian armed forces to the city of Zaporizhzhia has been reduced to approximately 15 kilometers. Overall, the configuration of the grey zone, as well as the southern and southeastern districts of Zaporizhzhia itself, confirm this information. In practical terms, these 15 kilometers already represent the immediate approaches to the city, and if we consider the Zaporizhzhia agglomeration as a whole, it can be said that Russian units are already operating directly within its boundaries. After that, we move on to the Huliaipole area, from which a significant amount of information is also coming in. As of today, various mapping services, both pro-Ukrainian and neutral, have made serious changes south of Huliaipole. According to these updates, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have managed to establish full control over the R85 highway and effectively link Huliaipole with the settlement of Polohy and further with southern directions, including Chertovate and Tokmak. Thus, Huliaipole has been integrated into a unified logistics system of Russian units. This, in turn, may significantly facilitate further advances westward toward the city of Orikhiv in the near future. A large number of video materials are coming in from this sector of the front, most of which show combat operations already on the Ukrainian-controlled bank of the Huliaipole River. We also observe that the Russian Federation is completing the formation of a stable bridgehead along the entire course of the Huliaipole River, from Huliaipole to the settlement of Tionovate. It is precisely this bridgehead that is being considered as the starting point for a further offensive toward Zaporizhzhia. Next, we move on to the Pokrovsk area. Given the current situation, the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad direction is probably no longer entirely accurate to call that way. Increasingly, it is being referred to as the Dobropilia direction, and overall, this more accurately reflects what is happening. The Russian army continues active assault operations. Over the past day, new adjustments have been recorded from this sector, and the map has been updated accordingly. Video recordings have also appeared online from the area of the settlement of Novoshakov, showing FPV drone strikes against Russian assault groups moving through this territory. At the same time, sufficient data and indirect confirmations have already accumulated to suggest that Novoshakov is under the control of Russian forces. We also see that an extended bridgehead has effectively been formed along the railway line, stretching from the settlement of Rivne through Rodinska, Suketska, Dorozhne, Ivanivka, Novoshakova, and further to Vilna. This bridgehead already provides the conditions for further movement westward, toward Dobropilia and Belitska. As for Belitska itself, information was published today, indicating that units of the Russian army have managed to reach the outskirts of this settlement. At present, heavy fighting is underway in this area. According to assessments by pro-Russian military experts, Russian units have entered the territory of Belitske itself, and active combat engagements have begun there. It is likely that in the near future, we will begin to receive more detailed information from this direction. If we speak about the situation around Kostyantynivka, the configuration of the map here remains unchanged for now. However, an increasing number of geolocation materials continue to appear, mainly from the outskirts of the city. These data indicate that the perimeter of Kostyantynivka, apparently, is still under firm control of the armed forces of Ukraine. I would like to remind you that, according to statements by the command of the South Troop Grouping, the Russian army is expected to make significant advances in this direction in the near future, although at the moment these changes are not yet reflected on the maps of most analytical resources. Next, we move on to the Sloviansk sector of the front. Over the past day, a large number of objective control videos have been received from this area. The most significant and interesting information is coming from the area of the Sloviansk thermal power plant. Russian drones are already reaching this territory, and FPV drone operators are actively working there. This facility is of strategic importance, and the Russian side is clearly viewing this direction as a priority. The outcome of the fighting for the Sloviansk power plant could have a serious impact on further developments. First of all, this concerns the electricity supply of major cities such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, as well as the overall ability of the civilian population to remain in these areas. Russian troops continue to advance actively in the area of Debrova, as well as near Reznikivka. A number of sources claim that in this sector, units of the Russian army have already achieved noticeable tactical successes. It cannot be ruled out that this information will receive official confirmation from the Ministry of Defense in the near future. In addition, reports are emerging of intensive offensive actions in the areas of Kriva Luka, Zakotne, and Ozerne. Active assault operations are currently underway there, and the tempo of the offensive remains high. However, as can be observed, a limited number of confirmed geolocation data points have so far been received from these directions. At the same time, a large number of videos have appeared in the public domain showing FPV drone strikes against positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as against military equipment along the entire line of contact, from the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions all the way to the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk area. We now move on to the Lyman sector of the front. Today, Ukrainian sources published video materials related to combat operations in the areas of the settlements of Sosnov and Yarova. We will not be showing these videos, as they contain a large amount of graphic violence. In addition, at this stage we are not making any map adjustments for these areas, since there are still doubts regarding the authenticity of the video materials themselves, as well as the exact time when they were recorded. Nevertheless, most mapping services have already introduced changes in this sector, marking parts of Sosnov and Yarova as territories that have come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. For our part, we continue to wait for additional information in order to draw more solid and well-founded conclusions later on. However, even now certain materials and expert assessments are emerging, according to which Russian units have managed to break through the defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Zaporizhzhia area and advance very close to these settlements. Next, we move on to the Kupiansk sector of the front, from which a significant amount of information is also coming in. The main video materials published today are represented precisely by these clips. They show FPV drone strikes carried out by units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation against individual districts and specific sites within the city of Kupiansk. There are quite a few such episodes, but the most important and decisive factor here is the geolocation data. For example, one of the videos clearly shows strikes against Ukrainian positions in a specific part of Kupiansk, in the area of Kupiansk Lyceum No. 7. Because of this, it is still difficult to say with certainty whether the map needs to be updated and, if so, to what extent. For now, the situation remains unchanged. At the same time, this is an extremely important development. The first pieces of video evidence have appeared indicating that certain Ukrainian reconnaissance and sabotage groups have managed to reach the northeastern outskirts of Kupiansk and may have entrenched themselves there in an attempt to disrupt or block the supply routes of the Russian garrison located in the central part of the city. We will closely monitor how the situation in this area continues to unfold. There is a high probability that the Kupiansk counteroffensive has not stalled and may, in fact, intensify in the near future. Although it is worth noting that the timing factor also plays a role, New Year's Day is literally just a day or two away. In addition, information was received today about the advance of Russian units in the Sumy region, in the area of the settlement of Hrabovska. These data were published by several relatively reliable pro-Russian mapping services. According to their information, the Russian army is conducting an active offensive along the railway line, pushing further west, possibly with a slight turn to the northwest, in the direction of the city of Sumy. I would also like to remind you that the commander of the North Troop Grouping reported a few days ago that Russian units are already located approximately 20 kilometers from the city of Sumy, presumably approaching from the northern direction, from the Huliaipole bridgehead. This brings us to the end. Now let us move on to a review of the political developments. A bloc of European states that until recently seemed unshakable, the European Union, has, by 2025, begun to show an increasing number of signs of internal decay. This EU has no future, even European media outlets themselves are writing. The European Union is in a state of collapse, say leaders of some EU member states. What does the European crisis look like, and what are its root causes? Toward the end of 2025, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán warned of the risk of the European Union's disintegration. In a wide-ranging interview with the telling title, "Brussels Wants War, Hungary Wants Peace," he made it clear that EU authorities, through their reckless policies across multiple areas, have driven Europe into a dead end. Equally important, he noted, is the fact that Euro bureaucrats are now trying to find a way out, not by acknowledging their mistakes and correcting them, but by escalating confrontation with Russia, which could ultimately lead to war. There is a redistribution of financial, military, and political power that could provoke war, the Hungarian Prime Minister stated. The military tension felt in Europe is a consequence of the decline of Western Europe and the European Union. He views the current situation within the bloc of European states as a confrontation between parties of war and parties of peace, emphasizing that Hungary, regardless of any external pressure, stands firmly for peace. At the same time, Orbán believes that the main cause of what is happening is not even the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, which itself is a consequence of the broader geopolitical situation. The real cause is the political, economic, and social decline of Western Europe, Orbán says. This process began in the mid-2000s and accelerated due to inadequate responses to the financial crisis. 20 years ago, the economic indicators of the European Union and the United States were roughly at the same level. Today, America is soaring, while Europe is sliding downward. At present, the European Union is in a state of disintegration. A process of fragmentation is underway, coinciding with the strengthening of the imperial ambitions of the Brussels bureaucracy. Decisions are made in Brussels, but they are not implemented. First, one country fails to comply, then two, then three. Despite the intention to strengthen central authority, decision-makers are constantly forced to retreat. However, before the European Commission is forced to backtrack, it usually manages to inflict significant damage. Orbán recalled, in particular, the case of the so-called green transition, when Eurobureaucrats decided to ban the production of cars with conventional internal combustion engines starting in 2035. Eventually, this decision had to be softened, but by that time Europe's automotive and chemical industries had already suffered serious harm. Yet the greatest damage to Europe, according to Orbán, was caused by Brussels' anti-Russian sanctions policy, which has, in essence, devastated European industry. Energy prices have risen 2 to 3 times higher than those of competitors, making production in Europe unprofitable and stripping it of long-term prospects. The EU constantly restricts the sovereignty of its member states, Orbán complained, yet at the same time it lacks the ability to effectively use the powers it has accumulated. If a rapid and deep reorganization does not take place, and this is still possible, the process of disintegration will reach a point of no return. One could argue that Viktor Orbán and his party, who are set to face re-election next year amid growing domestic challenges in Hungary itself, may be exaggerating the situation and are, in principle, interested in portraying EU authorities as the main culprits behind a systemic crisis, while depicting the European Union as a sinking ship. However, just recently, two prominent figures from the European political establishment, entirely unrelated to Orban or Hungarian interests, voiced similar views in France's Le Figaro. Former French Finance Minister Arnaud Montebourg and Thierry Breton, himself a former European Commissioner and still a highly influential figure, so much so that US authorities recently barred him from entering the country. According to Arnaud Montebourg, even if the European Union is not dismantled outright, it must at the very least be deeply transformed. The reasons are clear: a backward and insufficiently competent Euro bureaucracy that fails to take national interests into account has become a brake on development, and the consequences of its decisions for EU member states are proving disastrous. We have grown accustomed to the United States holding us by the throat while the Chinese sell us their products. Fine, that means that in the end, we will become poor and dependent. The former minister does not mince words when describing the EU's predicament. We are industrial vassals of China and digital vassals of the United States. And who brought us to this point? The European system. As is often the case when speaking about Europe, Arnaud Montebourg repeatedly shifts the focus to the situation in France, which is simultaneously facing a government budget deficit and a trade deficit. We are an economy that has been in decline for 20 years, he says. The country increasingly imports instead of producing domestically. We are already short of factories and farmers. We have fewer and fewer service sector enterprises. The most promising segments of French industry have been sold off. Who said that France does not need factories? Well, that person has won. Alcatel no longer exists. Thank you for staying with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.